Well, the eighth annual State of Marketing to Engineers research report has been out in the wild for a few months now. And I asked my research partner, CJ Haight, to come by the studio today so that we can, pull back the curtain, provide you a little insider scoop as to how this research comes together, why we make the decisions we do when it comes to this research, and answer some of your burning questions that we've gotten as part of our Q&A of a recent webinar, as well as just things people have emailed and chatted us on LinkedIn. So you'll learn things like year-over-year differences, regional differences, some questions of why we didn't ask certain things or why we asked certain things a certain way. And as usual, there'll be lots of surprises in here, as well as things that we would love to dive into in the future. If you have any suggestions on what we should research in 2026, we'd love to hear from you. So at the end of this episode, you'll hear ways to get in touch with CJ. And as always, you can reach me on LinkedIn. Let's do this.
Welcome to Content Marketing Engineered, your source for building trust and generating demand with technical content. Here is your host, Wendy Covey.
Hi, and welcome to Content Marketing Engineered. On each episode, I'll break down an industry trend, challenge, or best practice in reaching technical audiences. You'll meet colleagues, friends, and clients of mine who will stop by to share their stories. And I hope that you leave each episode feeling inspired and ready to take action. Before we jump in, I'd like to give a brief shout out to my agency, True Marketing. True is a full-service agency located in beautiful Austin, Texas, serving highly technical companies. For more information, visit truemarketing.com. And now, on with our podcast. Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Content Marketing Engineered. I'm joined today by CJ Haight. He's my partner in crime for this research report over at GlobalSpec. Welcome to the show once again, CJ.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, Wendy. Always proud to be on this podcast with you to discuss our research that we put together every year.
Awesome. What's it like in New York today?
The weather is not too bad. It's actually feeling a little humid right now. So I haven't brought my summer clothes out yet. So I'm dealing with long sleeves, and I kind of wish I had some short sleeves on, but that's all right. It's part of the transition of the seasons, I guess.
Well, speaking of winter, not long ago, we released our 8th annual State of Marketing to Engineers research report, as you very well know. We did this together and then brought in a collaborator, which was Elektor, and they are a technical publisher located in Europe. And so that gave us a broader base from outside of North America. So it was a great little ad there, wasn't it?
Yeah, amazing adding Elektor this year. We've been building this report for 8 years now, and it was about time that we finally brought in another brand, expanded this report, expanded the audience that we were surveying for our research. So really excited to have them on board. They were an awesome partner to have this year.
Yeah. And you had a great idea for this podcast today. So historically, we've just presented the report, kind of respun our webinar, and we decided again, instead of that we would talk, give people a little bit of a behind the scenes look at how the report is put together, and then walk through some of the great questions. Man, we had so many questions on this year's webinar, didn't we?
Yeah, we did. But every single year, our viewers always bring great questions in, and this year was no different.
Yeah. And it seemed like there was a whole section of those that were all about why didn't you include this, or how is this done, or why didn't you break out this? So we thought we'd help explain how we approach this report and what we're able to do. But before we get started, for those couple people in the audience that haven't seen the report and don't know what we're talking about, maybe CJ, what's just a high level overview about the State of Marketing to Engineers?
Yeah. So when we're putting together the State of Marketing to Engineers, we're thinking about engineers, of course, but also just technical buyers. When we're asking our survey respondents these questions, we're asking them a few to kind of eliminate some people that maybe we don't want the data from them. And we're really looking for people who are involved in the purchasing decisions at their company in order to understand what technical buyers are thinking about when it comes to their content preferences, why they might lean towards why they might lean towards some brands over others, why how they feel about AI, what social media platforms they're going to. We like to stick to some trends, which we're definitely going to get into here. And then every year we like to break it out a little bit and try to explore something that maybe we didn't touch on the year prior. And talking about this Q&A and all the people who are looking at this research and then communicating with us and talking with us and discussing with us about this research, we love taking in that feedback in order to help kind of understand what direction we might want to go in next year. So I think that even this discussion will kind of give maybe a little bit of a preview in terms of our thoughts and maybe where we'll be going, but also just breaking down a lot of those questions, a lot of those opinions that people had about that research and data and why we do certain things and maybe not others.
Yeah, great. And we've learned you can only include so many questions before people drop out. So we've kind of figured
Yeah.
out our sweet spot, which CJ, our sweet spot is way more questions than the average quantitative survey like this. So I'm proud that the people that we're asking to fill this out take the time, they fill this out, they see the importance. So we're doing something right there, but it's kind of, walking that tightrope, isn't it?
Yeah, it's amazing because every year, I mean, we typically have right around 30 questions, and every year I feel like it's too much, but then I'm so proud with how many we end up getting in terms of responses and the high numbers we see. So it's amazing to see.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the types of people that answer this. You already spoke to one, which is, are these just engineers? So we definitely got that question. And we're like, no, but it's someone in a technical role that's making a purchase. So for instance, someone with a technical degree that's in sales would be discluded from this, correct?
Yes, yeah,
Or
exactly.
eliminated. Yeah.
Yeah, we're really looking for engineers and research and developers and trying to find that field. But then also in terms of the industries and how it breaks out, it's a fairly broad range of different engineers and technical professionals who are filling out this survey, which is always interesting for us to see and kind of talk about when it comes to presenting the data that we find.
Yeah. And, we try to do one or two industry breakouts later in the year. And so last year we broke out semiconductor and electronics, which was one of the larger sets of data that we had on by industry, even though, like you said, no one industry comprises more than, I think, 11% of the overall. So that's how distributed it is. And we found that when we break out by industry, the answers are very similar to the whole. So while we did it so people could see those answers isolated, it didn't really change the findings much. So that was just one interesting thing that I think people should keep in mind.
Yeah.
Okay, so this year we had a goal of getting greater representation from Europe. So how did that turn out for us, CJ?
Yeah, it turned out awesome. We did this by bringing in Elektor and offering to have them send out our survey and collect some responses from some of their own audience. And I think that it was pretty excellent. It was a great idea of us to try to expand this to more of a global report and receive some respondents more so in Europe and Asia. Last year, we had about 50% of our respondents when it was just the two of us putting this report together. Going into this year, bringing in Elektor, we saw our American response fall down to about 30%, and we saw Europe to hit right around that number as well at 30%. Asia was a little bit further behind in the 20s. Maybe we'll see that in other areas of the world increase next year. Maybe we'll bring in some more partners next year to help us out. But I think in terms of bringing in Elektor and having more of a European response was really awesome and really helps our report in terms of that worldwide reach and visibility.
It does. And so it helped and it gave more insight, but it also caused a little more analysis work
Yeah.
because when we saw global trends make a drastic change from last year to this year, the first thing we thought of was, okay, is this because of this change in the regional differences? And so you'll find in the research report, in several questions, we did break out by regions so you could look at those differences. And at the end of the day, regions didn't drive that much change as much as we thought they would.
Yeah, I agree, especially between America and Europe and looking at a lot of the differences in those responses. I would say America and Europe was fairly aligned on most areas. There were a few, like social media, where you saw a few differences, but for the most part, uh, the way that our respondents felt about our questions in America and Europe were fairly similar. We saw very similar responses there.
So another question we get a lot, CJ, is I would love to see changes. What are the trends year over year or multiple years? So when we report that out, sometimes we report that out and sometimes we don't. So why are we inconsistent, CJ?
Well, so we like to show the trends. We like to ask questions over and over again to in order to follow those trends. And when we find that information interesting, when we find that there are differences year over year, we do love to share that. We do that pretty typically with newsletters because we can see some changes year over year there. But in general, if we don't see that there's going to be a drastic change or anything that is too momentum for us to really report it in each research report, we'll kind of leave it out. However, I will also say that we do typically also include the previous year research reports on our websites. So if someone is interested in kind of going in and digging further into some of that research from previous years, you'd absolutely be able to do that and compare it to what you're seeing in our newest and latest reports.
Yeah, yeah. So most notable year-over-year differences are there. And
Yes.
then there's one other thing that is a bit of a gotcha is sometimes we don't get a question just perfect the first year we ask it, and we
Mhm.
may change some wording. And because of that wording, it's not exactly an apples to apples comparison. So a good example of that is last year we asked what the trust level was in AI tools. And this year we asked trust level in generative AI results. And that's a different question, right? So they're both asking about AI and trust, but the nuance is just different enough that we wanted to make sure and spell out, the differences in those responses year over year. So
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because we've been doing this for 8 years. So you would almost think that by this point we would have that nailed down. But it just
yeah.
goes to show how every year we do try to do something a little different. And AI is a section that we've only had now for a few years. So still working to perfect those questions, but it'll be really exciting to watch those trends now that we feel like we've gotten a better understanding of how to ask them.
Yeah,
Um,
I have a feeling we may have one or two more AI questions in our next one. We'll see for
Agreed. Yeah.
2026. Another one where we've looked at year over year change was on the buyer's journey. So, how much of the buyer's journey is conducted online before that buyer is ready to talk to the company directly? And we used to ask this question a different way. And then the past 2 years, we used a scale of 1 to 100.
Yeah, and I love asking this question. I think it's some of the most important data for us to collect for marketers to understand because the amount of time that an engineer or a technical buyer is spending online before making a purchase, that's on us, the marketers, to make sure that we are keeping that person informed and thinking about our brands throughout that entire process. So it's really interesting to see that data and to see just how long these technical buyers want to spend online.
Yeah, yeah, 60%. And so it's a great thing to put in front of sales too to say, "Hey, do you want to help influence the first 1 to 60 before they're ready to hop on a call with you or email with you? If so, let's talk about how you can do that. And let's talk about things like LinkedIn and helping with content and better sharpen our pencil on our ICPs or personas." So a lot of things that sales could do to affect 1 through 60 that they may not be thinking of. So
Yeah.
good thing to point there.
Um, and speaking on trends, talking about how long engineers like to spend online before speaking to someone in sales, we do also have questions that sometimes we'll ask every other year rather than every year because we don't see changes generally year over year. And last year, I believe it was, we asked our respondents what reason would bring them to then speak to a sales rep at a company. And we saw, for the most part, our respondents were saying that it was to confirm the information that they had collected. And so it really shows that 60%, like they're spending all of that time online gathering information, and they're not really going to speak to a sales rep until they want to confirm that all of that is accurate because they're getting much closer to pulling that trigger. So something to also think about in terms of our research and why it is worth going back to previous years and seeing some of the research we've collected, because there are questions that will appear in last year's that might not be in this year. Same
Yeah.
thing next year as well.
Sorry, we're not trying to be annoying. We just we have that cutoff, right?
Yeah.
Good. Well, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about one of the most popular questions we ask, which is which information sources do you routinely visit? So this is one of those benchmarking ones. We want to ask this every year. We do change the options of what people can answer sometimes. I don't know that we made any changes this year, did we?
I don't I don't know that we did.
Yeah.
And this is a question that we have been asking for quite a few years now. I think we have gotten an understanding of what engineers are looking for in terms of the sources that they're turning to. And every year, we think that maybe we'll see a little bit of a change. And this year, we saw a little bit of a
We
change in
did.
terms of what came in second there. But for the most part, we are seeing that they are going to supplier and vendor websites when it comes to finding information, which year over year, it shows that engineers want to go directly to the source and in order to find their information.
Yeah, and to be fair, number two almost tied with number one, so
Mhm.
that was a big deal. Should we share what number two is?
Technical publications found online was number two, and that was just below the vendor and supplier websites. Typically, we see a little bit more of a gap between that first and second option, and this year they were fairly lined up, showing that engineers are really turning to both sources in order to find their information.
Yeah, and the jump was like 36 percentage points. So that
Mhm.
was to me a significant increase, and it speaks to the concern of finding information that buyers can trust. And I can't help but tie that to some lack of trust with generative search. You
Mhm.
have some vendors utilizing tools like ChatGPT to take over writing, and they're writing shows that it's not credible, so they're not being a good steward of that content. And perhaps, and this is me just stating opinion here, but perhaps that's part of what's driving people to trusted sources with industry publications.
Yeah, I think that's a really good call out. And engineers are always looking for someone who is going to be able to speak on their level. So I think it's very easy for them to discern the difference between a human who's able to speak towards technical details and an AI generative system that is simplifying it and summarizing details.
Yeah.
Not that I think that engineers not that I think that engineers are completely against that ideal, but I do think that, they want to go to the source directly in order to kind of get their hands into the data themselves and play around with it themselves and compare it themselves, which I think is really important.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so also on information sources, CJ, I'd love for you to reconcile something that we get asked a lot. Okay, so we have this list of sources, and near the bottom is LinkedIn, but yet on our social finding, LinkedIn is one of the most popular platforms that people use. So why do you think this is?
Yeah. So a few years ago on this question, we didn't actually have LinkedIn listed. We had social media listed to see if they were going to social media in general. And because we kept seeing LinkedIn appear at the top of the list, we decided to change that social media wording to LinkedIn to see if that would impact it at all. We still see it fairly at the bottom of the list, which I think goes to show that while we know engineers are spending time on LinkedIn, they might not be going there specifically for product information. They might be going there for other reasons. Yeah. So the wording that we used to use on this question was actually social media, not LinkedIn, and we changed that to LinkedIn a few years ago to see if that would impact the results of where that landed on the list of sources that technical buyers were going to. We didn't really see it have too much of an impact. And I would say that this probably leads to the fact that engineers and technical buyers probably aren't going directly to social media to find the products and the solutions that they're looking for. They're going there for other reasons. And it'd be great if they run into those solutions while they're there scrolling. But they might not be going directly to that source when it comes to researching their purchasing decisions.
Yeah, I think that's a great explanation, and Yeah, and speaking of social, GitHub has now consistently been in the number 3 slot for many years now, and that's globally, as well as, when broken down by region. So a lot of people ask questions about GitHub. I think there's a lack of awareness and knowledge amongst marketers on what is GitHub and how can I effectively use that as part of my marketing mix.
Yeah, we're seeing GitHub. I mean, every single year it shows pretty towards the top of the social media channels that engineers and technical buyers see value in. So, and we've seen this reported for years now, with GitHub being fairly close to the top there and having a very strong presence in Europe, from what we can tell. So if you are an industrial marketer in Europe, you need to make yourself aware of GitHub. That is a very important social platform for you to be not only aware of, but for you to make sure your brand is visible on. Maybe in America, it isn't as important because we saw that GitHub was lower than it is in Europe. Um, but still something for us to be paying attention to. It's a platform that allows engineers to come together to discuss questions, discuss solutions, and from what we've seen, uh, we see that engineers really love those type of platforms that allow them to come together to have discussions.
Yeah, and Reddit comes to mind as you describe GitHub as one that continues to climb in the rankings of popularity in our study. So keep that in mind as well. I think both of those are ones that marketers could look into. And our Q&A blog has some links specifically for GitHub. So for those of you listening that want to dive in deeper, we have some resources available to you if you check out that blog post. Okay. Podcasts was another big mover on our research this year.
Yeah, we saw some really interesting data. Maybe not as exciting as we were hoping to see, but definitely interesting. Definitely something we should be talking about.
Yeah, so we saw that while 64% of technical buyers listen to podcasts, listenership dropped by 26 percentage points. And that's a pretty big drop. And of course, our first theory was, oh, this must be a regional difference, but it wasn't, was it, CJ?
No, yeah, and in fact, when we broke down America and Europe, we saw some of the lower numbers on in those regions than we saw for Asia and Africa, which was really interesting with podcasts. And also, I mean, talking about age earlier and thinking about podcasts, I think this could also be another way for us to kind of explain some of the downtrends we saw this year, with seeing a little bit more of the 56 to 65 age range in our respondents this year.
Good point. Yep. Another one we were asked about is, hey, what about influencers and analysts? Where are questions around this? And I think people are remembering back in 2023, we did a pretty big deep dive on influencers, which we called pundits, technical
Yeah,
pundits, because we are concerned about the word influencer
we were.
and how that might be perceived. What we did instead in 2025 is we looked at independent sources. So what did we look at around here, CJ?
Yeah, it was really interesting to gather information on independent sources. And while industrial marketers should be thinking of influencers, and that's why we included those questions a few years ago, we also think it's really important for us to be thinking about independent sources and how engineers and technical buyers are thinking about those sources, and if they're specifically going to search them out, if they care about sponsored content, if that impacts the way that they'll think about the newsletter or content piece that they're looking at. And we saw that as long as it's relevant, engineers and technical buyers will still be interested, and they may still click. And they do reach out to and look for independent sources as well.
Okay, there you go. So that solves some of those questions. I guess rounding out a couple other areas that we haven't touched on yet. Each year we ask some questions around newsletters. So that's a benchmarking question. And then emails, because email is such a popular way to nurture your database. We want to help marketers out with nuances of how to be better email marketers. So what are some things we looked at this year, CJ?
Yeah, we looked at how you can personalize the emails that you're sending out, and maybe what personalizations would our respondents care more about than others. And really what it came down to is our respondents are looking for personalized content that is going to be technical and that is going to speak to possibly the projects, the products, and the industries that they are specifically working in. And then we saw, like, towards the bottom of the list, some of the personalization elements that us marketers have probably been utilizing for years were at the bottom, such as using their first name, being able to allow them to choose an email cadence. And looking at this list, I think it's really interesting to kind of see the top and the bottom. Of course, we want that content to be personalized towards who we're sending our emails to. It's the best way to get them to engage with that email.
Yeah.
But I think almost everything on that list should be a goal of ours and should be something that we're thinking about incorporating into our emails if we're able to.
Yep. Because, like you said, some of it's easy. It's a low
Yeah,
hanging fruit,
exactly.
A first name. Ah, good, good. Well, I guess rounding things out, we also looked at brand. That was another deep dive in 2025. And we had two questions that were specifically crafted by actually True's brand strategist, Morgan Norris, that would help inform how to prioritize messaging around the company and around their technical solutions. So definitely check that out in the research. But what was interesting is some of the questions that came back. And so one of the findings was around, is location important to message? And location showed up fairly low on the list of what I look for in a company, that when I'm, making a purchase decision, what brand attributes do I care about, basically.
Mhm.
So while location was low, this was before all of the tariff stuff became,
Yeah.
on the global stage. So someone rightly asked in the Q&A, what do you think about messaging location due to tariffs? And I definitely feel like messaging should change as a result of that if you have a good story. So I've seen a lot of, companies, for instance, that are in the United States, that manufacture in the United States, really leaning into that messaging. And that makes a lot of sense right now. So great question there.
Good question.
And then there was a question on how to differentiate in a commodity market. So, all of us have what looks to be the same products and at the same time. And I think we had a lot of evidence in our research to help point people in the right direction for that as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I guess, CJ, to wrap things up, any other big observations or takeaways or things you're thinking of as we go into planning for 2026?
Oh my gosh. It's hard to even hear the name 2026. I think that we received a lot of great questions in terms of how we break out some of this research, and especially regionally, breaking it out in terms of age differences. I love some of those thoughts, and thinking about how maybe we'll display some of that information next year if
Mhm.
we are able to analyze those age differences and see how maybe that is impacting some of the questions, such as podcasts.
Yeah.
So I really love that idea. I feel like we had a lot of discussion and questions around some of those thoughts in terms of being able to show how different people are responding to each, because we do have quite a broad range of respondents, even though we're trying to really stick to technical buyers involved in the purchasing decisions of the company. It's still fairly broad. And any way that we can help try to narrow that down, I think
Yeah.
that would be a really great goal for us to look towards for 2026 and beyond as well.
Yeah. And, we mentioned at the beginning of this podcast that we do look at regional breakdown, year over year, age. And when it's not significant, we just don't say anything. And it might be that we need to surface some of that so people feel like, okay, they looked at this. That wasn't the driver behind things, like podcasts or whatever it was. So might be something, even a one-liner that we add, because I know it's a lot to put every diagram and every chart.
Right.
This report would get very thick and long, and we're trying to keep it digestible too. So,
Mhm.
yeah. Well, CJ, if people are listening and they want to connect with you, learn about GlobalSpec, maybe throw you ideas for what we should study in the future, how can they do that?
Yeah, the best place to connect with me directly would be on LinkedIn. You can find me. Christian Haight is my full name there. And then you can also find GlobalSpec, a few different sources to find information on them. We are available on LinkedIn and YouTube. You can also check out our website, advertising.globalspec.com, to see some of the solutions that we can provide to industrial marketers and helping them grow their business.
Awesome. Well, thank you for your time today, CJ. Great to see you.
Thank you so much, Wendy. Great to see you as well.
Thanks for joining me today on Content Marketing Engineered. For show notes, including links to resources, visit truemarketing.com/podcast. While there, you can subscribe to our blog and RA newsletter and order a copy of my book, Content Marketing Engineered. Also, I would love your reviews on this podcast. So please, when you get a chance, subscribe and leave me your review on your favorite podcast subscription platform. Thanks and have a great day.